lot of cartoons are usually created when a studio is looking for new ideas and turns to their in-house talent, developing an idea into a pilot, and in the best case scenario, that pilot lands a full series pickup. But sometimes things don't work out despite the show being a fantastic idea. Maybe a network will pass on it, or it'll run for a season or two before getting the axe. Either way, these shows need a hero, and once in a blue moon, one will emerge to rescue it from the clutches of wasted potential. You guys really dig these kind of videos that get into the nitty-gritty of animation. So today, we're gonna take a look at instances where cartoons change channels, examining why these shows switched homes, how they changed as a result, and if these changes were for the better.
Hurry up! We're not even supposed to be on this channel!
But you almost were, Double D! Why do you think your shirt is orange?
That's true. That's like 100%. Everything you said was true.
Adventure Time deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore of animation, saving Cartoon Network from its first big dark age, with Finn and Jake practically becoming mascots for the channel throughout the 2010s. And now it's keeping the Cartoon Network brand alive, with spin-offs like the young adult geared Fiona and Cake, the upcoming side quest show milking the series for all the one-offs they can muster, and BMO's preschool show. Now that's a role model the kids deserve. Yet, there was almost a world where Finn and Jake weren't rubbing shoulders with Mordecai or Gumball, but SpongeBob and Aang. That's right, Adventure Time almost winded up on Nickelodeon. A common fun fact among the fandom that only gets crazier as the years pass, given its immortal status over at Warner Discovery. Nickelodeon commissioned the pilot as a part of their Random Cartoons program back in 2008, although it leaked online a year prior in 2007 and went viral. This era was the first time absurd humor really took over the internet, so the short had no trouble thriving.
What's going on? Abraham Lincoln?
Ben, your mind has been transported back in time.
At first glance, it's not all that different from its Cartoon Network counterpart. Finn and Jake are palling around, learn that the Ice King is back on his bullshit, and spring into action. What'll immediately stand out to the viewer is our main protagonist. Finn's name is Penn, clearly being based on the creator Pendleton Ward. His hat has a curve at the bottom, which admittedly does throw me off a bit, as I always found his hat blending into the shape of his body to be visually satisfying. It's a top-tier character design. But minor changes to the characters and art style aside, the biggest difference between Nick's Adventure Time pilot and the final product on Cartoon Network is the lack of any and all implications of lore. The Land of Ooh isn't the result of an apocalyptic event, it's just a wacky environment where chaos can unravel at any moment, which is perfect for the late 2000s. Kids' cartoons with grand narratives were around, but they weren't at the top of the chain, probably because Adventure Time popularized it. It was a silly cartoon with a lot of heart and a lot of promise. So why did Nick pass on it? This thing had a fan base before the pilot hit cable and was built for hundreds of episodes. How could the network that's been hungry for a new SpongeBob for years possibly turn it down? They thought it was too weird. Oh, okay. So this, and this was fine. But we're drawing a line at the crazy old man who abducts women. Actually, now that I said it out loud, that tracks. On a serious note, while it's easy to point and laugh at Nick for letting a massive hit like this slip through their Cheeto-colored fingers, I get why they didn't bite. Adventure Time lacked a lot of what Nickelodeon looked for in a cartoon. Its setting wasn't grounded in reality, eliminating locations like school, the mall, or even a place of work, which are commonplace in Nick shows. Even SpongeBob worked in some of these staples. Finn has no parental figures, his best friend is pushing 30. When they say it's weird, I don't think they're referring to the humor. I think they were just concerned about relatability and producing a show that could be engaging while imparting valuable life lessons onto the audience. Little did they know, it blossomed into exactly that. Most people look at the pilot and say, oh, thank God they didn't stick with Nick because it would have been canceled after 2 seasons. But even if they kept it around longer than most shows, I don't think it would have evolved into the Adventure Time we know and love today. Nickelodeon is a network that wants shows to have their shit figured out as quickly as possible. For example, Jimmy Neutron and Fairly OddParents can have continuity, but they never had a shot at becoming story-driven in their heyday. They started out largely episodic and died episodic. Any semblance of serialization was often reserved for special events. Meanwhile, shows like Danny Phantom and especially Avatar always made it clear that even if every episode isn't connected, there was a bigger picture at play and an end goal in mind. All of these shows maintained a pretty consistent tone from start to finish. but book 1 was so lighthearted compared to the rest of Avatar. My guy, Aang finds the decayed corpses of his people 3 episodes into the series. The show always knew how to get dark and twist the knife. Point is, I think Nick's Adventure Time would have remained the absurd, low-stakes comedy that it started out as. It would have never become the hilarious, philosophical epic with compelling character arcs and an overarching story, and never would have gotten as many spin-offs and specials that it has. Events like Stakes and Islands probably would have never happened. At most, they would have been hour-long TV movies that wouldn't have landed as well. I also shudder to think how much they would have capitalized on Finn's love life. Did you see what they did to iCarly once shippers made their presence known? Good God. Nickelodeon has never been much of a risk-taker channel, despite 2 of their biggest animated franchises arguably being huge risks. Meanwhile, Cartoon Network, who was all about experimentation, found themselves in a tough spot and desperately needed to breathe new life into their catalog. So when Adventure Time was looking for a new home, it didn't take long for the 2 to realize that they really gelled. And now, the fun will never end. Literally never. 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 When you look into Phineas and Ferb's backstory, it feels like it took 104 years to get these 104 days of summer onto TV. In reality, it only took 17.
Don't worry, Pops. We're almost to your room.
Dan and Swampy were pitching around different networks, including Cartoon Network and the Fumble Masters over at Nickelodeon, only to be sadly met with rejection. But I don't want to tell their story for them, so I'll leave it to 2 other black dudes.
We sat across from each other at The Simpsons. We were laughing at the same jokes, and we ended up as a writing team on Rocko's Modern Life. We created Phineas and Ferb while we were there as a means of letting us work together more as writers. This was like 16 years ago.
God, we're old.
It wasn't like we pitched it to every network more than once. We pitched it to 4 different places. We'd get real close, they'd say no, so we put it back on the show for a couple years. Then I've got a pitch over at Cartoon Network, I'll dust it back off and pitch it to them. If they say no, I'll dust it back off and pitch it to Nickelodeon.
2 reasons we kept at it. 1, we are stubborn. And 2, it's always been the show we wanted to make more than the others. With all the stuff we've seen coming on the air, this one is really the best. There's no reason to throw it away and move on. Every time you read it, you think, this is a good show.
It was really the show we wanted to see. If this was on air, I'd watch it. And I don't feel that way about every show I work on.
The show has a level of plot complexity they won't let most people do.
That was actually the reason it didn't get picked up until now. Fox Kids wanted to put it on their next season. We had a couple meetings with them. At Nickelodeon, it kept going up higher and higher to the next echelon. Everyone loved it, but they eventually thought it was too complex to pull off. Disney was the first to say, let's see if you can do it in 11 minutes. We did it in a pilot, and they said, let's see if you can do it for 26 episodes.
Thanks, y'all. The check will be in the mail.
You're not paying us.
You caught me. It's a DoorDash gift card.
I use Postmates, Dick.
To be fair to all these networks that passed on Phineas and Ferb, it is absolutely a complex show. And usually complex means a lot of money, which networks famously do not like spending. Every episode has 2 completely separate storylines that have to converge by the end, even if they feel a little fill-in-the-blank ad-libby sometimes. One of these storylines involving some insane new idea Phineas and Ferb came up with, and the other sees Doop and Schmertz whip up a new nader. Not to mention the whole musical aspect, which is already challenging on a writing level. But when it comes to animation, that sounds like it could be a nightmare. A new endeavor every episode means that the design department is going to be busy. The show constantly requires new assets, which doesn't sound very economical. I think when networks are shopping for a new show, they aren't just looking for a good idea, but something they can churn episodes out of without major delay. This sounds like a show where if a team gets stuck on one episode and ends up missing deadlines, the whole thing could get backed up. They managed to make it work with the evergreen setting of the backyard and Doofenshmirtz Evil Incorporated. But even then, the A story doesn't always stay in the same place for long. Even if you're not constantly whipping up new backgrounds, shenanigans like the Finadroids and Furbots, backyard beach parties, and Swinter back to back to back don't sound like a walk in the park. And obviously the show got a lot more ambitious as it went on. Not that many studios could foot the bill compared to Disney. They were producing all their shows in HD just for sick kicks back in the day. I think the biggest thing we gained from Phineas and Ferb migrating to Disney Channel over the competition is the amount of songs we got out of it. Something tells me that if the show didn't end up at Disney, the songs would have been few and far between, instead of a huge part of the show's identity. Maybe that's because there weren't that many shows from the big three kids networks that embraced having a ton of songs without it being the main appeal. Shows like Class of 3000 and Victorious had a ton of music, but those were the driving force of the marketing baked into the show's premise. What drew you into Phineas and Ferb was simply watching these two brothers have cooler lives at 10 than you will at 30. Wondering how Doof and Perry's beef would whisk away the boys' invention this week. The music was for sure another reason to come back for more, but you hardly saw the show being advertised as a musical. But because of how much effort it takes to include in every single episode, adding to its complexity, something tells me Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network would have had a quirky song here and there, but generally it would have been reserved for a musical special or two, like Fairly OddParents School's Out, instead of something you can get multiple albums out of. I feel like Phineas and Ferb is why shows like Adventure Time and Steven Universe were able to capitalize on music. A rival network proved that it's a worthwhile inclusion. I shudder to imagine a timeline where Disney didn't score the show, considering that it carried their animated division for a bit. Kim Possible was ending, and we were a few years off from Fishhooks and Gravity Falls. The impact this show had on Disney cannot be understated. It was so powerful that they moved premieres to XD for a while, recognizing that this cartoon could get viewers hooked to a brand new channel. Even now, a decade after its conclusion, the boys are coming back to hold down the fort, which goes to show the importance of never giving up on your dreams, even if it takes far longer to achieve than you planned. Stick to your guns, and you might end up saving a network, or at least be life support. Star vs. the Forces of Evil premiered on Disney XD in 2015 with the expectation that it become the flagship show, with Phineas and Gravity Falls heading out the door. It never got as big as the aforementioned tunes, but it still managed to be one of the most popular animated series of the 2010s. Which means it's another show Nick fumbled, although this fumble was definitely for the better. The original premise of Star is drastically different from what we ended up with. Star isn't a magical princess from another dimension. Instead, she's a normal 5th grader who thinks she's a superhero from beyond the cosmos, a la Superman. Star attempts to help people around her city with her imaginary powers, even if they don't want her to. Star truly believes that her powers and home planet are real, interacting with monsters who aren't really there, and casting spells that only she can see. The show actually has a nod towards its original premise in Storm the Castle.
You like magic, little girl?
The pitch Bible does say that they wanted to leave the existence of the fantasy world up to interpretation, but I think that setup is ripe for an ending where Star lets go of her fantasy world, embracing that it's time to grow up. Or they would bring her creativity full circle and flash forward to a grown-up Star who is a successful author, turning her fantasy world into a book series. Obviously, magic is very real in the series. Instead of a fantasy world Star made up in her head, she hails from the kingdom of Muni, and she isn't trying to be some protector of the city. Instead, her parents ship her off to Earth with the mission to mature as a person, hoping to prepare her for the day she becomes Queen of Muni. No magic also means we lose a lot of characters. Maybe Ponyhead would have made the cut as an imaginary pal, but no Ludo, no Glossaric, no Toffee, no Eclipsa? Why even live? Another huge difference between Nick Star and Disney Star is the lack of one Marco Diaz in the Nick pilot, which blows my mind because he's a huge component of the show's identity as its second lead, being based on Darren F's husband. Maybe he wasn't in the picture yet, so the inspiration for Marco simply didn't exist. Instead of her karate-chopping, hoodie-loving BFF, Star had two childhood best friends named Mallory and Jenna, who now can't stand her in the present day. They are bitter at the world for their lack of popularity, and seem to take it out on Star, as presumably associating with her has tanked their own reputation. This version of Star feels like it would have been a lot more cynical for the sake of highlighting Star's relentless optimism. To quote the pitch Bible, the world that Star is attempting to be a superhero in is not an easy one. She lives in an apartment of her mom in a rundown neighborhood a block away from her mother's antique store. Her grade school is pretty rundown as well. It has a lot of kids, ranging from kindergarten to 6th grade. Damn, they had all the seasons covered. covered. Her school has a fair share of its ugly bullies, mean girls, and fed-up teachers. Despite this, Star loves running around her neighborhood looking for adventures and people to help. She contrasts with her surrounding. It's so interesting to me that the whole world is against Star here, as you see the exact opposite in the Disney series, where the students of Echo Creek adore Star and are endeared by all of her quirks. I kinda hate Jenna and Mallory. These bums have nothing on Jana or Marco. Because this idea is so drastically different from the Star we know, it's apparent that this iteration of the show wouldn't have become as story-driven as Disney XD's Star. And a lore whore like me isn't very fond of that fact. Not because I don't love my episodic comedies, but because the lore in Star rocks. As for why Nick passed on the show, there doesn't seem to be a concrete answer out there. But I do think it likely struggled to stand out from cartoons they already had on air, like The Mighty Bee and Making Fiends. This version of Star is pretty much an amalgamation of both. Bessie envisioning herself as a superhero that she'll totally become when she collects every honeybee badge, and Charlotte being a relentless optimist surrounded by pieces of combined with the fact that neither of these shows were smash hits, getting screwed over like every other Nicktoon, I think this was a reasonable rejection, and we got a way better show out of it. I don't want this entire video to be centered around rejected pilots that ultimately amount to Nickelodeon looks goofy, so let's have a little lightning round. The Brown Family. There was a pilot produced for Nick, it ended up at Disney, and that probably gave it the budget for an absurd amount of guest stars. Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Pitched to Nick, they wanted full creative control. Danny Antonucci said f*** off. Cartoon Network let him have full creative control. The rest is history. Any channel but Cartoon Network would have probably forced in more characters, and the school setting would have shown up way before season 5. 12 Forever. Pilot was produced for Cartoon Network. They turned it down. And I don't think they regret it. What happens when a show doesn't just change channels, but its entire nationality? You get seasons 2 through 6 of Johnny Test. I feel like Johnny Test is a very divisive show on the internet because on one hand, this was a staple of a lot of people's childhood. Reruns carried summer afternoons in the late 2000s to mid 2010s. And on the other hand, it's kinda cheap and annoying. But what if I told you it wasn't always like that and only happened once it switched studios and by extension, channels? You see, season 1 of Johnny Test was produced in the United States by Warner Bros. Animation for Kids WB, and like a lot of Western animation, it aired on Teletoon in Canada. Although it was always a co-production between the United States and Canada, the 2006 merger between UPN and the WB led to budget cuts. Johnny Test was way too popular to kick the bucket, so after a brief hiatus, Canada's Cookie Jar Entertainment took over production full-time, making it more of a Teletoon show in my eyes. Still airing on Kids WB in the US until season 3, which concluded with a finale that was clearly meant to be the end of the show as a whole, but because kids loved it, it got renewed for a season 4 and pivoted to Cartoon Network in the West. Cookie Jar taking over production had an unfathomable impact on the quality and tone of the series. Visually, it was clear they had less money to work with, no longer being animated on paper with the old digital ink and paint approach, and switching to Adobe Flash. Even as a kid, I could tell that the switch took all the sauce from the animation. Just some dry-ass chicken. The series also just felt way less ambitious as it went on. It used to really embody what it meant to be a Saturday morning cartoon, never taking itself too seriously while still prioritizing the rule of cool, and establishing a neat Freak of the Week format. We're watching Johnny slowly build a rogues gallery when he's just trying to have fun. After the switch to Cookie Jar though, the show became a lot more formulaic and acted as a sitcom above anything else, really relying on the assets they already had made, as the same characters were popping up over and over to make the same predictable jokes. A big part of it is seasonal rot, as creator Scott Fellows still wrote a majority of the episodes until the last couple of seasons, and I think he just got burnt out after the show hit its natural endpoint. But another factor is that we've lost the Warner Bros. Crew. Even if the writing staff remained largely the same, artists really shape a show's identity and help inform the story in ways you wouldn't even think of. The new studio, while working on the show for much longer, just didn't have that connection of building Johnny Test from the ground up, and I think it led to a pretty bland version of the show. Netflix picked up a reimagining of the series for 2 seasons, which ran from 2021 to 2022, produced at Wild Brain Studios, which felt like it was trying to blend what worked about the 2 versions of the show to decent results. It didn't really stick with me, but that's probably because I aged out the target demographic a long time ago. Futurama is a series that has hopped around multiple networks without being rebooted once. Premiering on Fox, rerunning the Fox era on Adult Swim, eventually getting revived by Comedy Central, and now it's back for more on Hulu. The show has managed to stay focused on the Planet Express crew throughout all of this, but each era of the show definitely has its own identity. The Fox era, being prime Futurama, has more world building and lore payoffs, lots of teases, and character introductions like Nibbler and Leela's parents. The stories are a little more focused on the core cast, like Leela getting a second eye or Fry's girlfriend coming back. The Comedy Central era is where we see the show switch to HD. While the original series never shied away from topical episodes, the Comedy Central era dips into the more tackling subjects like the iPhone or Obama's birth certificate through Senator Chris Travers.
Well, Barack is what it says on my birth certificate.
Yeah, you might want to hold on to that.
Returning characters are brought back, but in a more natural way. Callbacks are smaller parts of episodes. Planet Express deliveries noticeably become less common too. The Hulu era loves to have all the Planet Express crew involved in the main story, so they can chime in for a gag or two. It's no secret they lean into topical stuff more than ever, like NFTs and COVID, but also just topic-based episodes in general, like Beanie Babies. And while that one has a sci-fi twist ending, full-on sci-fi-oriented premises are a rarity, usually reserved for big season finale episodes. What I adore most about the Hulu era is that there are a lot more sequel episodes to the previous eras, something that I think they're able to pull off, as the entire series being on Hulu can encourage a rewatch. If you're tuning in for just the new stuff, but don't remember whatever they're calling back to, you might end up starting over from episode 1, which benefits Hulu. If I have one major complaint about the Hulu era, the animation quality took a dip. A lot of streaming services aren't putting in as much money into their animated series nowadays, and it shows. Sucks, because I could see Futurama looking phenomenal if they gave it the flair it deserves. Adult Swim has a reputation for saving adult animation that's gotten screwed over at other networks, although these revivals are few and far between. One of the most notable being Home Movies, which is a personal favorite of mine. Brendan Small just wants to make his silly little movies with his silly little friends, but he has a knack for getting into shenanigans. Like when he got hit by a car, and unfortunately for him, it was totally his fault, but instead of owning up to it, he made a dramatic reenactment to support his case, which included a rock number about why running over kids is bad.
Hit it, boys! Don't kill children, don't run them over!
Premiering on UPN in 1999, the series only lasted 5 measly episodes before getting canned. The remaining 8 episodes went unaired until Adult Swim picked up the series in 2001, where it would run for 3 more seasons. The most notable change about the Adult Swim era is that it abandoned the squiggle vision technique inherited from Dr. Katz and switched to Flash. Cheaper for the network and easier on the eyes of viewers, a lot of who were turned off because of squiggle vision. While I've come to appreciate the season 1 style over the years, childhood nostalgia recognizes season 2 onwards as the definitive look for home movies to me. Quality-wise, the series just got better on Adult Swim. For the most part, it was business as usual. But it was easy to notice that there was a bigger focus on continuity for a bit, far from serialized. But the presence of characters like Brendan's father, Andrew, made it so being up to date wouldn't hurt. It's insane to think that Home Movies isn't a tried and true Adult Swim original, as it's a series that's synonymous with the network to me. When I hear that piano that kicks off the theme song, I flash back to sneak watching Adult Swim in my childhood. I don't think UPN regretted canceling the show at all, because it simply wasn't the best fit for their target demographic. UPN viewers liked dramas and live-action sitcoms. There's a reason their run of unconventional adult animation didn't last long, but that highlights the beauty in rescuing shows. It allows for them to find the right audience, and the inception of Adult Swim enabled a ton of adult animation to connect with the people they were truly made for. It also allows them to make the competition look dumb as f***. Tuca and Birdie, a sort of sister show to BoJack Horseman. Created by Lisa Hannawalt, who worked on the Talking Horse dramedy, Tuca and Birdie follows 2 titular best friends living in the same apartment complex as they navigate through adulthood and try to get their shit together. And there's Speckle, Birdie's boyfriend. We love Speckle here. Premiering on Netflix in May of 2019, a year prior to the conclusion of BoJack Horseman, this should have been an easy layup for the streaming service. Getting that audience hooked onto a brand new anthropomorphic animated series that's different from BoJack but still offers multifaceted characters and stories that unpack the effects of trauma. Unfortunately, Netflix denied it time to flourish, canceling the series just 2 months after its premiere in July 2019. So Adult Swim decided to capitalize on the series themselves, announcing that they ordered a brand new season in May of 2020, which premiered 2 years after its cancellation in June 2021. And because it was airing on Adult Swim, episodes were hitting HBO Max shortly after, which means they effectively jacked an original series from their competition. So if you're someone who found this series on Netflix one random afternoon and now you need more, the other 2/3 are on another streaming service. Better pay up. You could tell Adult Swim really believed in the series too, putting their best foot forward with marketing, a stark contrast from how Netflix rolled out the series. I think the only real significant change between the Netflix and Adult Swim eras of the show is that the Adult Swim seasons felt a bit more episodic, with overarching storylines that were digestible on a weekly basis. If you've never seen the show before, you might need to pick up on context clues, but you'd still have a good time. Season 1 was designed to be binged. It was a lot harder to drop in on a random episode and follow what was going on. Also, no more plant titties! Damn you, standards and practices! What's the point of life if the bird cartoon doesn't have plant titties? Unfortunately, Adult Swim did cancel the series in 2022 after season 3. I think a lot of factors were at play, such as cable's dwindling viewership, the fact it's a 22-minute series whereas most Adult Swim shows are 11 minutes, which means it was pricier to produce, and animation at Warner Discovery has been struggling in general ever since Davey Zaza took over. Still, these birds getting a second chance at life and running twice as long as they did over at Netflix is nothing to sneeze at. Don't be sad that it's over. Be mad! Fuck this guy! We've covered shows that were pitched from one network but ended up on another, and shows that started on one network before migrating to a new home. So let's finish this out with a show that didn't just switch channels, but transcended to an entirely new demographic. Ren and Stimpy's Adult Party Cartoon. I don't want to talk about this one. Samurai Jack. One of the greatest Cartoon Network shows of all time, chronicling the journey of a nameless samurai who gets flung into the future by the embodiment of evil, Aku. As a largely episodic series, Samurai Jack ended without a proper conclusion, getting canceled by the Big CN in 2004. Although fans were always interested in a continuation, their wishes were eventually answered, not only with a comic continuation, but a 5th and final season announced for Adult Swim in 2015, premiering about 2 years later on Toonami in 2017. Despite my gripes with the season, I really admire how the leap from a kids network to an adult network is baked into the narrative. Jack's grappling with suicidal ideation. He has to take human lives for the very first time. And we have this banger from Scaramouche. They could have gone buck wild with blood and swearing, but instead they sprinkle it all throughout the season. You can count how often both happen on your fingers. Kendi knew how to age the series up with the audience and have it feel truly mature, instead of constantly leaning into edginess for the hell of it. The season's also completely serialized. Every episode in this season builds upon the last, as the series finally crosses the finish line. Granted, they had to take another lap and change the ending in a video game, but hey, I'll take it! Admittedly, I wasn't super fond of the completely serialized aspect, as I was really interested in seeing how its habit of episodic stories would have played out without the restrictions of a kid's network. But I understand why they did it. I'll always respect dedicating an arc to Jack's decaying mental health. 10 episodes wasn't nearly enough in my opinion. There are some major pacing and execution issues in the back half of the season, but the sheer existence of this revival is something I'll always admire. It goes to show that kids' cartoons can age up with the viewers that were locked in with them when they were new on the block. Just never do this shit again. And there you have it, folks. Cartoons that have changed channels. As always, I want to know what you guys think. Were there any notable shows that I missed? Are there any shows that you think should have stayed on one channel? Or do you think all of these happened for the better? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going over on Twitter and Instagram at AustricVox and at Roundtable Vids. If you enjoyed this video, please sort to like, subscribe to the Roundtable for more great cartoon content, and consider supporting us over on Patreon. Long videos like these need as much help as they can get. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Peace.